Hey guys, it's Libby. So, vlog every day in April, clearly going swimmingly, what with having missed the past 2 days. I have good excuses. On the 2nd of April, I was moving into my new place. And then on the 3rd of April, I was sick as a dog. And I attempted to do some filming, but I was just like, man, I just look and feel like crap and no one's gonna want to watch this. But today I'm feeling slightly better. I did sprain my ankle, I'm pretty sure, carrying in all of these things, hence chair. This is a swivel chair, so be prepared for a lot of this sort of thing. Whee! But ROHPEDA, which is a thing now, read 100 pages every day in April, or cheat and just listen to 2 hours of an audiobook because I have arbitrarily decided that that is approximately 100 pages and I think I have vastly underestimated. It's going great. I am on track with my audiobook of The Mystery of Edwin Drood. I think today I'm going to take a break from it and read an actual physical book because this is less of a busy day. And I'm going to read the first 100 pages of The Last Continent by Terry Pratchett. And then tomorrow finish up Edwin Drood. But in today's video, I'm going to do finally my March wrap-up. As you may have noticed, March was a bit of a hot mess of a month for me. I only read 2 actual novels. There were a lot of short things and some audiobooks. So at the beginning of March, I went on a Shakespeare binge. Every couple of months for a weekend or so, I will just need to feel the bard in my life and I will read a bunch of Shakespeare plays to the exclusion of everything else. This binge was relatively small. I only read 3 plays. They were A Midsummer Night's Dream, All's Well That Ends Well, and Richard III. And I actually read them online, but I have these nice Yale Shakespeare editions, so I will show you. Also, these are the only books I have to show you right now, so enjoy it while it lasts. So I guess I'll do reviews of these, even though it's Shakespeare. Midsummer Night's Dream. It is about 4 young lovers who are in a love square and they go off into the forest to try to solve their problems. This is poorly timed, however, because the king and queen of the fairies are fighting and they're just kind of messing everything up, including the lives of these 4 young people. And it's set in Greece, ancient Greece. Despite this, I have never seen a production of The Midsummer Night's Dream set in ancient Greece. The 1930s, the modern period, and the Victorian period are all really popular. Someone please do an ancient Greek Midsummer Night's Dream. And I gave this 4 out of 5 stars again, because this is like my 6th time rereading it or something. Then I read All's Well That Ends Well. This is one of Shakespeare's later plays. It's sometimes called a problem play because not everybody dies, so it's not a tragedy, and it's not about actual historical figures, so it's not a history, but it's not super happy. So you kind of have to put it in the comedy block, but it doesn't feel right, so we'll just put it in the comedy subcategory of problem plays. And this is about a young lady named Helena who is an orphan and sort of lives upon the beneficence of the Countess of Roussillon, and maybe she's the Duchess of Roussillon. Let me check. Yeah, she's the Dowager Countess of Roussillon in France. And she is in love with the Count, who is the son of the Countess, not the husband. That would be even more difficult. But since she is poor and lowly and he is rich and lofty, she doesn't make her love known until one day the King of France is deathly ill and her father was a doctor and she has his secret potions. So she goes to the King of France and she's like, I'm pretty sure I can cure you. And he's like, no, you can't though. I am the King of France. I can afford the poshest doctors in the land. And she's like, okay, just give it a go. And he says, okay, we'll try. And then lo and behold, she cures him. And he is so appreciative that he allows her to choose a husband from anyone in the court. And of course, she picks the Count of Roussillon. Unfortunately, he does not like this situation. And to go any further would start to cause some spoilers, so I will leave it at that. Spoilers for Shakespeare, is that a thing? Romeo and Juliet die at the end. Anyway, I gave this play 4 out of 5 stars because the plot is kind of silly and kind of fairy tale-like in the way that things just work out, as you might have guessed from the title, All's Well That Ends Well. And finally, Richard III. Richard III is about Richard III, but he started out as the Duke of Gloucester. Let me check on that. There's too many noble people in these plays. Yeah, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Not to be confused with Richard, Duke of York, who is also in this play. And this is a very biased look at Richard's rise to power, which involves a non-trivial amount of murder. But this play is also ridiculous. Like, we think of Shakespeare as this incredibly noble, brilliant playwright, and I really enjoy the words he writes, but the plots that he comes up with are so nuts. So the most nuts thing in this play is, I think it's the second or third scene, so I'm not spoiling anything, but Richard comes across this lady named Anne, and she is in mourning for her husband and her father-in-law, who Richard has murdered. And he shows up and she just starts yelling at him about what a vile serpent he is and that sort of thing. And he's like, "But I love you so much." Because he wants her to be his queen for reasons. And like, by the end of the scene, she's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll marry you." It's just such a turnaround, and I feel so bad for any actress who ever has to play Anne Neville, because how do you do that scene? No human would act that way. Non comprendo. So I gave Richard III 4 out of 5 stars. So after my Shakespeare binge, I was still sort of feeling the early modern feels, so I listened to the audiobook of Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, by Samuel Richardson. I listened to this because I've started listening to the podcasts on Slate, and this book came up in like 2 separate podcast programs, and everyone was talking about how amazing this book is. And I was like, wow, this must be incredible. And there were bad reviews on Goodreads, but I was like, I trust the people at slate.com. I will give it a go. And I should have listened to the Goodreads reviews. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars because I'm not like mad at Samuel Richardson. I don't think he was doing anything wrong, which would have merited just 1 out of 5 stars. He was just writing a pre-modern book before we really valued dynamic characters. And the book is like 500 pages long, and it could have been 200 pages long. It's very samey. Pamela doesn't have an arc. The romantic interest, I hesitate to call him, does have an arc, but it's completely unbelievable. So what happens is, Pamela is this lady's maid sort of thing to, I'm not sure if she's like an elderly lady or if she's just a sick lady. It's the 18th century, so like dying at 40 is totally feasible. So her mistress dies, and she sort of comes under control of her mistress's son, who would really, really like to have sex with her. And that's what the first half of the book is. He's trying super hard to have sex with her, and she's like, no. And she just keeps refusing him, and it occasionally gets super rapey. You let me down, Slate. You let me down. And then I did manage to read an actual novel, The Savage Garden by Mark Mills, which I don't have because the last 2 books that I was reading I didn't pack up with my other books, so I'm not totally sure where it is right now. Here's another book by Mark Mills, in case you want to see how his name is spelled. And The Savage Garden is kind of a light mystery novel. There is a mystery element, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. And it's set in the 1950s. It's about an art history student at, I believe, Cambridge, and he has to like start thinking about his big honors thesis sort of thing. And his professor suggests that he go to this house in Italy, which has a very interesting garden that he could write his paper on. And when he gets there, he starts to think that the garden was laid out with a very specific intention from the designer. And the family currently living there experienced a tragedy during the Second World War, which maybe is not all that it appears. So there's really two pretty much unrelated mysteries going on at the same time. And let me just say, I really liked this book. However, I would not necessarily recommend it to everyone. The mystery element isn't that strong, so there needs to be something else in the book that appeals to you. So, if you are interested in post-war Italian politics and society, you should read The Savage Garden. If you are interested in Italian Renaissance art history, you should read The Savage Garden. And if you are interested in classical mythology, you should read The Savage Garden. And after I finished The Savage Garden, I looked at some reviews on Goodreads, and they were harsher than I feel it deserved. A lot of people were really complaining about the sex scenes. And so I was ready for them to be awful and gratuitous. But like, they really weren't that bad. I don't know what people were complaining about. They're not horribly written. They're not like overly detailed. And I mean, the story like could have been told without them. I think that at least one of them definitely helped in terms of like emotional involvement. Yeah, don't listen to those people on Goodreads. If this book sounds good to you and you're just worried about pointless, gross sex scenes, don't let that put you off. And at this point in the month, we were getting into some of the crazy shenanigans with our lender, which I'm not going to go into. But basically, our closing date kept getting pushed back. So I just read some short online stories from authors that I already knew I liked. The first one was The Yellow by Samantha Hunt. I'll give you a link down below to the story if you want to read it. Samantha Hunt wrote The Seas, which I read back in January, and I thought it was really, really well done. The Yellow was weird. It was a weird short story. It's about this guy. I think it's called The Yellow because at the beginning of the story, he like decides he needs a change in his life because he's, you know, in his 30s and living in his parents' house and doesn't really have a job. So he paints his whole room yellow. And then he goes driving at night and accidentally hits someone's dog and kills it. And so he brings it to the house that it belongs to, and weird things happen. I'm not totally sure what was going on. Like, I would say don't read it because I don't think it enriched my life. It was strange and it was not like beautiful. And the other short story I read was We Were From the Mountains? We Were From the Mountains by Kate Morton. Kate Morton writes modern Gothic novels. The ones that I've read are, they're over here. Nope, over here. The House at Riverton and The Distant Hours. She was born in Australia, but she now lives, I'm pretty sure she now lives in London. And so this short story, I think, is really drawn from her own life. It's definitely semi-autobiographical, if not fully autobiographical. And it was not my thing. It's pretty much a portrait. It's not really a story of her life as a child. And she and her family lived out in the mountains in a rural area, and sometimes they would go into the city to visit their grandmother, and their grandmother's house had all sorts of interesting sights and sounds and traditions. I was kind of skimming at a certain point. And I am not saying that this is a bad short story. I'm saying this is a short story that is not for me. Because if there's one storyline that I cannot stand, it is this meandering sort of story about children growing up in the 20th century in a rural area. I don't know what it is, but I am always profoundly bored by these. I don't care about your life, random children. I'm sorry, Harper Lee. I'm sorry to everyone, but I don't like To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't care about these people. Could we just have the part about the trial? That was kind of interesting, and not like Boo Radley and how your brother once went to like read a book to this crazy old lady. I don't care. I'm sorry, it's very easy for me to move into complaining about To Kill a Mockingbird. So I gave We Were From the Mountains 2 out of 5 stars, but you may very well like it more. And then the last novel that I read was The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I do not have that with me because, again, it wasn't picked up with the other books. This is Bellman and Black, another book by Diane Setterfield. That's what I got for you. So The 13th Tale is one of my favorite books of all time. This is my second reread of the physical edition, although I have listened to the audiobook multiple times. However, it is an abridged audiobook. Why? Every word is so perfect. Why would you cut any of them? And oh my god, it's just so good. It's just so good. The 13th Tale is a modern Gothic story. It's about a young lady named Margaret Lee who lives a very quiet life. She and her father run a rare books store, and like the spoilers start in chapter 2, so it's kind of hard to describe this to you, but Margaret, what do I even say? Some bad stuff happened to her, like from before she can remember. And in chapter 1, she gets a letter from the famous novelist VEDA Winter. And VEDA wants Margaret to write her autobiography. And VEDA is very well known for being cagey with journalists and not giving out information about her real life. So this is a big deal. But Margaret kind of looks down at VEDA's writing. She's into the classics like Bronte and Dickens. And VEDA Winter writes these modern things. But she ends up going to at least investigate, and she ends up hearing VEDA's story. And so the book really has two narrators. You spend maybe slightly more time in VEDA's voice, telling the story of her childhood, and then slightly less than half from Margaret's point of view, hearing about how the interview process is going and additional research she's doing because she doesn't trust VEDA, at least in the beginning, and discovering the secrets of VEDA's house. And this book has the greatest twist of any book I have ever read. Serious mind blow. Like, you get towards the end and you're like, how is this possibly going to be resolved? It doesn't make sense. What is happening? And then at the end, when you figure it out, or rather Margaret figures it out for you, you're like, oh my god, all of the information was in front of me the whole time and I didn't recognize it. This is amazing. So 13th Tale, clearly 5 out of 5 stars. It is an awesome book. So in March, I read 3 plays, 2 short stories, 2 novels, and I listened to 1 audiobook for a total of 8 books, which means that I have read 29 books this year, 4 books ahead of schedule for the 100 book challenge. And this, I believe, is going to be the craziest time of the year. So I am so set for this. So I will be back with another video tomorrow. Hopefully there will be no more breaks in my VEDA attempt. And we will be building a new bookshelf. And by we, I mean I. Unless any of you want to come over to help, I would appreciate that. because this shelf looks nice, but everything else is kind of a disaster.